Events in Washington have taken a violent and tumultuous turn in the past few hours as thousands of supporters of President Trump stormed the U.S. Capitol building, venting their anger at the victory of Joe Biden in the presidential election.
All right, y'all, we need to talk about the man, the myth, you know who, Donald Trump. Now, love him or hate him, there's no denying that Trump left behind a legacy as one of the most talked about presidents in modern history. But if you thought his last time in office was controversial, the stakes for his comeback, they're even higher. So what has everyone so divided about Trump in this election, and why do some folks seem ready to forget his past? Let's get into it. Now, imagine this. The year is 2016. Trump's sweeping up votes left and right, making headlines.
So I made a decision to run. We're going to make America great again.
That were practically screaming, change is coming. But fast forward to his time in office, and let's just say, it wasn't all making America great again. We're talking scandals, broken promises, a pandemic, and an actual attempted coup. But somehow, with all this chaos, he's back in the running, and the polls show he's got a real chance. So how did we get here? And what exactly are people choosing to ignore about Trump's first term? Grab some popcorn because we're diving into the good, the bad, and the oh-so-ugly of Trump's time in office. Okay, first things first. Let's talk numbers because numbers don't lie. During his presidency, Trump hit some of the lowest approval ratings in modern history, around 34%. To give you some perspective, most presidents, even if they have rocky terms, don't drop that low. Yet here's the twist. In recent surveys, nearly half of Americans, 48%, now say they view his first term favorably. So, what changed? Well, here's where things get psychological. People have a funny way of romanticizing the past when the present feels rough. It's like the political version of an old relationship you know wasn't good for you, but you miss anyway. That's the kind of nostalgia Trump's banking on. Let's set the record straight on some of those so-called achievements Trump touted.
I would build a great wall, and nobody builds walls better than me, believe me.
First up, remember the wall? You know, that infamous border wall? Well, the big, beautiful wall that he promised to complete never really happened. Sure, parts of it were built, but a lot of it was just existing structures getting a facelift. And don't even get me started on his handling of healthcare. Trump swore up and down he'd replace Obamacare with something better and cheaper, but 4 years later, no replacement, nada. Meanwhile, millions were left with rising healthcare costs and no real plan from the Trump administration. Now, if there's one thing that really defined Trump's first term, it's his handling of COVID-19. When the virus hit, people expected the government to step up, right? But Trump downplayed the threat.
And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do either through the skin or injection inside or...
Even going as far as suggesting people inject disinfectants to fight it off. And yes, he actually said that. Under his leadership, the U.S. had one of the highest COVID-19 death tolls in the world, with hospitals overwhelmed and health experts sidelined. But here's the kicker. Even now, Trump insists he handled the pandemic perfectly. Like, let's not forget he caught COVID himself and downplayed the severity, setting an example that cost lives. Trump's branding himself as the law and order candidate was, let's just say, ironic, because under his watch, he had over 20 of his close aides indicted, with several facing convictions and even jail time. We're talking serious charges, from election interference to fraud. Yet somehow Trump managed to make himself seem like the victim of a witch hunt. He even went as far as promising to pardon people involved in the January 6th insurrection. Like, let's be real. How is that law and order? And now let's talk about Trump's stance on race. He's famous for saying he's done more for Black Americans than any president since Lincoln. But remember Charlottesville? When white supremacists clashed with protesters, Trump's response was to say there were very fine people on both sides. That moment defined his reluctance to outright condemn white supremacist groups, a reluctance that, to many, was deafening. It wasn't just Charlottesville either. Trump repeatedly appealed to these groups, telling the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by during a presidential debate. Now, maybe he thought it was clever wordplay, but to a lot of folks, it sounded like an invitation. Remember when Trump said he'd drain the swamp? Well, he sure hired a lot of swamp creatures to fill it back up. Case in point, Trump's team included folks who were found guilty of all kinds of unethical practices, ranging from tax fraud to abuse of power. And let's not forget, his own CFO was convicted of financial fraud. Even Trump's closest allies, like his former campaign manager, ended up serving time. So, I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound like draining the swamp. It sounds like building a whole new swamp. Then, of course, there's the grand finale of Trump's first term, the 2020 election. Trump not only lost, but doubled down on his claims of election fraud. He called for his supporters to protest the results, and well, we all saw how that turned out out on January 6th, thousands stormed the Capitol in one of the darkest days in modern American history, all fueled by Trump's unfounded claims of a stolen election. Many of those people have since been convicted of serious crimes, while Trump has promised to pardon them if he wins again. That's not exactly comforting. So, with all that in mind, you're probably wondering, what would a second term for Trump look like? Well, he's already hinted at some eyebrow-raising plans. He said he'd look into banning COVID vaccines and bringing in advisors with some, let's say, unconventional views on health. And let's talk about RFK Jr., who's become a prominent figure in the anti-vax movement. Trump has floated the idea of appointing him to a health role. That's right, the guy who thinks vaccines are the enemy could be overseeing U.S. health policy. It's giving doctor who doesn't believe in medicine. And I don't know about you, but that's a pretty scary thought. So here's the deal. Trump's first term left a mark, a big one. Whether you think he was unfairly targeted or that he really crossed the line, the facts are the facts. And as much as some people want to remember his time in office as the good old days, there's a lot that doesn't add up. If you're considering Trump in this election, ask yourself, do we really want to go back? Because if history tells us anything, it's that sometimes the past isn't as golden as we remember. And with Trump, the stakes have never been higher. Alright, that's all for today's video, y'all. Don't forget to subscribe and drop your thoughts in the comments. Are you Team Trump, or do you think it's time for someone new? Spill it in the comments, and I'll see you next time.